Good morning, Year 3, and welcome to today's Foundation and Literacy all rolled into one. Now, the reason I've put both lessons together is because in order to do our literacy this week, we're going to need to know a little bit of information about something significant from World War II. Because our boy that you looked at a picture of, hopefully you may have written about him, but you might have talked about him yesterday, he's lying in bed, he's going to have an adventure. And we'll talk more about his adventure later. But we're going to include some of the information about something called the Battle of Britain. So we're going to do our foundation learning about the Battle of Britain first, and then when we know lots about it, we'll be able to do our literacy lesson much better. We've had some input. So, excuse me. I wonder if any of you have ever heard of the Battle of Britain before. I don't suppose I have when I was your age. Well, we're going to find out about it then. So, if you bear with me while I pause, we're going to share a PowerPoint as usual. Okay, hopefully you can hear me over the top of the pictures. So, the Battle of Britain. Well, where do you think it took place? Yeah, it was an air battle. Not usually where you think battles might take place. The Battle of Britain was an air battle. This is a German plane in the picture. It's got different markings than the British planes would have. Now we need to know when the Battle of Britain took place and maybe why it took place today. So we've already learned about the start of the World War II, where Germany invaded many countries in Europe, and he reached a point where the German army had control of most of the countries of mainland Europe, but they didn't have control of Britain. We're an island, and the German soldiers hadn't managed to cross the English Channel to come and take Britain. So by the point of 1940, Adolf Hitler wanted to invade Britain because Britain was still fighting against the Germans, and he wanted to stop us being able to do that. So he had a plan to cross the English Channel with his boats and invade Britain called Operation Sea Lion. But to do that, he wanted to make sure that he owned the skies as well, and that we couldn't use our planes to attack the boats when he invaded. So he launched the operation with lots of planes to try and bomb Britain because we wouldn't agree to surrender. So the German Luftwaffe, that was their word for Air Force, was sent to destroy the Royal Air Force, which is known for short as the RAF. The picture you can see on the screen there is of a British plane. It's got the British symbols on it. This particular plane's got a Spitfire, and we'll learn a bit more about Spitfire later. It began on the 10th of July 1940, when British ships in the English Channel were bombed by the German planes. And the German Luftwaffe had many more planes than we did. They had at this point of the war, they had 2,600 planes that they could launch attacks, and the RAF only had 640. You'd expect from that we were likely to lose this. In August, the German planes decided that the Luftwaffe decided they were going to bomb our airfields. That's the name for like an airport. The harbours to stop our boats, and the radar stations. Radar was a special way of us being able to tell if the planes were approaching and help our planes fly. And if they bombed our runways, our airfields, and they bombed the radar, our Air Force wouldn't be able to do their job very well. And the factories that were also building planes, so we couldn't build many more to fight back. In 1940, the Prime Minister at the time, do you remember who he was? Yeah, it was called Winston Churchill. And he very famous saying, because there were not that many pilots involved in the Battle of Britain, there was only as many pilots as we got planes. But they did a very important job, as we'll find out by the end of this story. And a very famous quote was, "Never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few." That means that everybody in this country owed a great debt of gratitude to just a few small pilots, a small number of pilots, because they did a very good job. By the 31st of August 1940, the Germans, we made us have large losses of planes. They shot lots of our planes down, and the Germans started to think that they were going to win the battle. So by September 1940, the Germans had started bombing the cities like London, which we've already learned is known as the Blitz, because they thought they'd done enough damage to the airfields and the RAF that they had control of the sky. So they turned their attention to bombing the cities instead. This actually gave the RAF time to recover their defences, maybe make some more planes, maybe mend the radar, and get ready. So only a week later, on the 15th of September 1940, the Germans launched a massive attack. They sent lots of bombers and lots of fighters to Britain to cause massive damage. But the British fighters, the RAF, took off in their fighter planes, flew into the sky and reacted very quickly and shot down lots of German planes. And the Germans realised they couldn't win, that our air force was actually now better than theirs. We were more organised. And so this date was officially the end of the Battle of Britain, because the German army didn't manage to get control of the skies. The RAF did a very good job. And if they didn't have control of the skies, that also meant that the invasion that they planned was postponed. And so we never got actually invaded on the ground. The Germans carried on sending bombs and rockets later in the war, but they never actually managed to land German soldiers on British soil, apart from the small islands known as the Channel Islands that were quite near to France. They were controlled by Germany. At the time, even though this was really serious, it was quite exciting for people to watch. You could sit in our country and watch the planes in the sky doing loop-the-loops and flying and leaving their trails in the sky. And also when we started to do well and we were shooting down all their planes and they were shooting down ours, people started to feel like the war was turning out our direction. It even says here that the newspapers would report the numbers almost as if they were scores in a football game. So that Germany had shot down this many, but we'd shot down that many. But by the end of the Battle of Britain, Britain had lost 1,250 planes, way more than they started with. That's because we built lots more. But Germany had lost 1,700. So we inflicted more losses on their pilots than they did on ours. Now, the story you're going to write this week, and I'll come back to that in much more detail later, is going to involve the boy going up in a plane. Now, that sounds a bit unlikely, because he's going to be a dream story. So he's going to have an adventure as if he's in a plane in the Battle of Britain. So some of the things we're going to talk about now will be worth you trying to remember, because you may be able to include them in your plan. When fighters used to have a battle with each other, it was known as a dogfight. Small groups of planes flying close to each other in the sky, flying closely, turning, twisting. And so if you watched planes doing that, you'd be saying they were having a dogfight. Now, if you were a good pilot and you didn't get shot down, you destroyed 5 enemy aircraft in a battle. You were known as an ace. I wonder whether the person in our story is going to have been an ace. Maybe they might be known as a fighter ace. And we're now, along with all our soldiers, we remember the people in the war, and sometimes there are statues to commemorate. If you look in this picture, you can actually see the clothes that the pilots would have worn in both of these illustrations. This has been turning. They've got their leather flying helmet and their goggles on, so that they keep their eyes clear, especially, and sat in with their straps on. And here they are running, ready to get on the plane. We'll watch a video in a moment of people actually doing that at the time. Now, as I said, we're going to write a story on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Here's just an example of something. Your story may end up sounding a little bit like this. I'm going to read a bit of a story about somebody who's in a fighter plane. You might be able to remember some of these ideas and include them. Through a break in the cloud, Tom could see a band of Messerschmitts advancing towards him like a pack of wolves stalking their prey. For a few seconds, it was as if time had stood still, and then the air around him exploded in deafening gunfire as the Allied and Nazi planes flew amongst each other at crazily close range. Tom nose dived down through the cloud, swerving around the left-hand side of the enemy fighters to try and gain a better position. But one of the Messerschmitts was right on his tail and blasted him with a round of fire. With his heart beating wildly, Tom spun sideways and immediately pulled his Spitfire upwards into a vertical climb, somehow managing to avoid being hit. His head pounded and he felt dizzy, disorientated from the sudden change in altitude, but the air in front was clear and he managed to level out. Now, with an advantageous bird's eye view of the battle scene a few hundred feet below, he dived back down. He opened fire on the enemy plane, which had forced his retreat, and almost instantly it erupted into flames. So, we're going to look at some things shortly to do with video clips to give us a bit more idea of what that might actually have looked like. But in that last passage, there was probably a word that you've never heard of before, Messerschmitt. And here are some illustrations of the planes that were flown in the Battle of Britain. Britain was well known for the plane called the Spitfire. It was our fastest and most agile. And without the Spitfire, we may well have lost the Battle of Britain. We also had some planes called Hurricanes, but the most well-known German fighter was called a Messerschmitt. And they also had some bombers called Heinkels. And so, if you're writing a story, when we write things set in history, try and use specific language so that it sounds right. So the word Messerschmitt, if you're going to use it in your writing, is on a piece of paper that's got some useful topic words for you to use, which is also going to be posted to the website, but you can copy the spellings properly. So we've heard a little bit about why the Battle of Britain. I'm just going to take you off sharing, just go over that again on the board before we move on to the literacy objectives. This picture is from a comic at the time, which will show planes fighting in the air, shooting each other and exploding, which we're going to use in our story. But what was the Battle of Britain then? Well, just in simple bullet points, World War II began in 1939. Something that wasn't in that presentation, but I think it's worth knowing. We had soldiers on mainland Europe in France trying to fight against the Germans. But at the start of the war, the Germans had the upper hand and they forced the Allies, that was the British soldiers and some of the French who were fighting, all the way back to the edge of the English Channel. And we had to go and rescue most of our soldiers, as many as we could, in boats, big boats, little boats, anyone who had a boat, and big warships, sailed across the English Channel to try and rescue these soldiers off the beaches. And that's known as Dunkirk, because that's where it happened. So at that point in the war, we were an island. We had no soldiers back on mainland Europe, and Hitler decided he's ready to invade Britain next. He needed control of the skies to be able to do that, so he sent his planes over, and we sent our planes up, and that's what the Battle of Britain was, when the two air forces met in the air. And, as we know now, because you just learned, and maybe I could add, Britain won the Battle of Britain. And it's important to realise quite how important this was, because had we lost the Battle of Britain, then the story of the war could well have gone a different way, because Germany may well have invaded, and we wouldn't have had the opportunity to fight back, which we did later in the war. So, Battle of Britain, we'll leave that now. You hopefully know what that is. And we're now going to have a look at some video clips and things so that you can have a feel for what it might have been like to be in a fight in the Battle of Britain. Now, lots of history, when we do Egypt and things like that, there's not really many videos, there weren't video cameras at the time. But in the time of the World War II, there were cameras filming. So the footage you're going to see on some of these clips is real film footage, not made for movies. It was filmed at the time. They've added some colour to it because the movies probably would have been black and white. It is important to remember, although we're going to do an adventure story with a boy in a plane, that in the videos that you watch, if a plane is being shot or it looks like it's on fire, that was a real person. And so just like we show a bit of respect when we're doing, when we have Remembrance Sunday in November, please bear in mind that these were real people. This is real history. So I'm just going to pause the screen and show you, sorry, to too much to remember in one go. I'm going to show you a list of one of the things I've uploaded today is a Spitfire Battle of Britain links page. I'm not sure if you're seeing this, bear with me. I don't think I've shared it. Try this. Bear with me a second. I'm just going to pause recording while I sort this out. Okay, I'm ready to share. Had to have so many documents open, it's so difficult. Okay, one of the documents that's been uploaded today is a World War II Spitfire Butler Britain links, and on it are hyperlinks to web pages. It's about 4 or 5, and they're all different videos that it would be great if you watched them, because you would have a better feel for what the Battle of Britain was really about, and also it will make your writing a lot better. Because I bet somebody thinking, how do I write about being in a plane battle? Well, if you watch the videos, so there are some little clips. We're going to watch a little bit of one together. So I'm sure that you've all seen something. But there is one of the videos. It says watch and make sure that you're listening to the sound of the engines. You can see the fire coming out and the propellers spinning. One of them, it's good because you can see the tracks that the planes leave in the sky while they're having a dogfight. And one of them, which I'm about to share with you, also gives you a little view from where the pilot would sit. Does anybody know what that's called? It's called the cockpit. So where the pilot sits in a plane is known as the cockpit. And so you can see what it would look like to be sat looking at all the dials and the levers and the wings. So you might be able to add detail about that. Now, I'm just going to stop sharing with this, and I'm going to show you 2 of the video clips. Share something different. Hopefully it's coming up onto the screen in a moment. Refresh it. There you go, it's come back. This here is what it would look like to be in, but if you click and scroll, you can zoom in and zoom out. You can actually see the wings sticking out. Imagine if you were sat here and you could see planes above, and as you looked over your shoulder, you could see planes coming at you from behind. And you can zoom in. If you use the pluses and minuses, this is called the joystick to be able to control the plane. You push it forward, you pull it back to make the plane go up, and push it forward to make the plane go down. Then some of these how high you are, show the speed. It used to be quite frightening just sitting in there and flying the plane yourself, I should imagine. This actual Spitfire is still flying. We're very lucky that lots of planes have been kept since the war, and so if you go to air shows, you can sometimes see it. And one of the clips is about a wreck of a plane that's been rebuilt. So finish. Let me look at that one, and then now I'm ready to show you the video that includes some real footage of the Battle of Britain. It shows German planes taking off in their bombers, and then it shows British airmen running to get in their Spitfires, and you see some real footage. I won't show the whole of the clip, and maybe watch the rest of the clip yourself later. These are the German planes taking off. One of the things, they're called flying in formation when they all form like playing like birds fly when they're flying all close together in patterns. There's the British airmen running to get in their planes. They take off from grass fields. You don't necessarily need a maid for proper airport. Tiny little things. There's plenty dropping bombs. And I'll pause it there with the Spitfire on the screen. So there's a few more videos to watch so that you really have a feel for what it would be like, and the sound and the noise. And then I think you're going to be ready to be able to come up with some ideas for a literacy story. So that is called a Spitfire, and we're going to imagine that's going to feature in our story shortly. So I'm just going to take that off screen share and then bring you back to the literacy. Right, yesterday you looked hopefully at a picture of a boy sleeping in his bed. If you didn't, if you could go back to yesterday's lesson that's posted, the information that's posted, and have a look at the picture. And so we had a little think that he was probably an evacuee yesterday who's maybe been sent to live in the countryside, and he's left his mom behind in the city. He's a little bit worried, but he's had a tiring day helping out on a farm, a bit like the children in Spy Watch if you've been watching that. And he's gone to bed and he's fallen asleep reading his comic about the Battle of Britain. And so if you looked closely at that picture, this is something we didn't talk about yesterday, what is coming out in the middle of the book? Yeah, there seems to be a plant growing out of the middle of the pages. Would that really happen, do you think? Well, it could do if you're writing a really amazing, imaginative story. But in our story this week, we're going to imagine that when the boy wakes up, he sees the plant he's growing out of the pages. In actual fact, he hasn't really woken up. This story is going to be a dream, unless you're very clever and put a twist on the end. So, why do you think you might be dreaming about if he's fallen asleep reading his comic about the Battle of Britain? I imagine he may be having a Battle of Britain dream. So the boy in your story, when you write it, I'm going to tell you how my story would go. So the boy woke up, and out in the middle of his book was growing a strange plant. He looked a bit like a beanstalk. There were lots of tiny little stems going in different directions, but there was one main stem, and it wound along the floor and out of his bedroom door. This was not something he was expecting when he woke up in the morning, and he felt he really needs to go and investigate, or at least go and find somebody to tell them. So he followed the beanstalk, and he went down the stairs. Then he went out the front door. And so, without thinking, he rushed out the door and followed it. It snaked its way up the garden path and out the garden gate. Now the boy, and you can give him a name in your story, mine's going to be called Frank. And the boy, called Frank, followed it out the gate. Now Frank was living in the countryside. He'd been evacuated to his farm, and so he wasn't very far from the fields. And so he followed the beanstalk as it snuck through a ditch and over the bank, and then headed towards a hedge. And it went into the hedge. So the boy got on his hands and knees. He was a little bit wet now, but he was very intrigued by what was going on. And he crawled through. And when he got to the other side, he couldn't believe what he saw. He didn't realise that the farm that he was on was right next to an airfield. And there in front of him was a row of Spitfires. One was just taking off in the distance, but most of them had got their propellers spinning and the doors shut and the pilots were sat inside. And as he's looking with his mouth open in surprise, a man runs up to him who's dressed in a flying helmet and some goggles and says, "Quick, get in. We need everybody up. The Germans are coming." And so the man pointed to where there was a pile of clothes. So Frank quickly did as he was told. And he put on his flying helmet and his goggles and he stepped onto the wing so that he could get into the cockpit of the empty plane where the propeller was already spinning. And he sat in, and without thinking how to do it, he shut the lid. And before he knew it, his plane was rolling along the ground and he was in charge of the controls. I'm going to stop there. So your boy in bed is going to wake up and he's going to end up however you write it. It might be different than I did. I hope it is, because it will include your ideas. He ends up in the cockpit of a Spitfire. Now, the middle part of your story is going to be Frank, in my case, taking off and having a fighting in the air adventure. Now, think about the videos you've watched about all the things and the language you've used, and there's words on the help sheet like squadron. That's a group of planes that you might throw that in. But he's going to hopefully dodge some bullets. He might have to hide in the clouds. He might shoot some other planes down. I don't know how the adventure's going to go in the middle. It's up to you. At the end of the story, he's going to end up with Frank back in his bed, waking up again for the second time and realising it was all a dream. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe there's something he has that proves it really happened, but I think it's likely to be a dream. And so somewhere towards the end of your story, something's going to happen that might be a bit of a shock, which is enough to make him sit up and almost like he's had a bad dream in bed. So maybe his plane gets shot and it explodes, and as it explodes, he wakes up in bed. Or maybe he has to jump out and use a parachute, which is what pilots would have done if their plane had been badly damaged and they were going to crash. They would parachute out. You may have seen the pilots wearing their parachutes as they ran to get the planes in that video. So maybe as he drifts into the cloud and he can't see, he's turned white, he drifts away in bed. Or it could be that the parachute lands in the sea, and the minute he hits the sea with the water, with a big splash, he wakes up in bed. Maybe he's wet. It's a bit confusing. So it's up to you how you come up with an idea for how he suddenly wakes up in bed. So if you're going to do a story Wednesday, Thursday, Friday that involves the boy and then an adventure and then waking up in bed, you're probably going to need a story plan. Otherwise, I should imagine you're going to get a little bit lost. And each day this week, I'm going to model doing the opening, sharing some of the openings, looking at how to do the exciting middle, and then how you're going to write your conclusion, the end of the story. I'm just going to share with you now another document. So much sharing today. This is your planning sheet, which you can download, or you can do it on a piece of paper if you don't have a printer. So we have 8 boxes. Can't quite get to the scroll bar to scroll to the bottom, but you've got 2 rows. So the first picture that you can see is your boy that you're going to give a name, and he's lying in bed and he's fallen asleep. In the next box, you may have a picture of him running to get in the plane, and the plane's taking off. And you're going to draw some pictures for the exciting bit that happens in the middle. And then underneath, you're just going to write the key idea of what's happening. You're not writing your story in these boxes, they're not big enough. It's just the story plan. It's just the key points of what's happening. And then we will come back to this story plan tomorrow and write the start of the story. One more document that I'll share with you. I'm just going to stop sharing that one. And I'll share one more. This page here will be useful for you when you're writing later in the week. Think about what would you hear, what you would smell, what you might taste. But some of the words you might find useful today are these topic words here, and then you've got them spelled correctly. It might be worth you talking to somebody about what these words mean, maybe or a barrel mould is what a squadron, or what the word formation means. There's the spelling, like I said, of the word Messerschmitt. Okay, and the Spitfire, those are the two names of the planes that we fight against each other. You might want to use this to help you get some of the spellings correctly on your plan. Right, it's been quite a long video today, hasn't it? Because you've done 2 lessons in one. You've only got maths left to do today, really, and a little bit of spelling. So you've learned about the Battle of Britain. You're going to use the knowledge you have to write an exciting story plan for the boy in the bed. And I look forward to seeing some of your plans sent in tomorrow and sent in today, so that we can see how great your stories are going to be. Okay, for now, goodbye.